Hey guys, it's Malice here once again, and it's been a few days since I've made a video because I have been pretty sick, and I'm still just a little bit sick, but I am good enough to slam a video down about this Cospri's Malice character I've been playing for the past few days, which at this point is level 88, and has gone through quite a lot of content, or just mapping, and it is very similar and reminiscent of the first Cospri's Malice character I played back in Harbinger League that did feature Freezing Pulse and Glacial Cascade. This one is similar in that status of using Cascade and Freezing Pulse. Freezing Pulse, however, has been updated. There is quite a lot of new shit to play around with, like Val RF that you could see just there. Plenty of new gear, and I thought it was time to try and bring this character up to a slightly higher level, I would have thought, and see what kind of endgame content and damage it can do. But mostly, it was just a really fun character that I was kind of sad to be benching, because back then, wasn't really that keen on mapping too much up to the early 90s and all of that. Incursion has changed that a little bit, and getting to play this character again means that I do go from 1 to 90 once again, and then get to take on some endgame, and I'm pretty happy to be doing that with this type of character, because it was a lot of fun to map and a lot of fun to play with. And the other main difference is that Scion Ascendancies did get reworked quite a bit, so I am still Elementalist in this one, but this time I am also a Raider instead of Assassin, and trying to fill out my crit elsewhere with a bunch of other crit stuff. Now throughout this video you can see that I changed my Herald of Ice micro a few times from Gloom to Innocence to Automaton. There's quite a lot of ones, and they do make the build feel just a little bit different, but rest assured it's still the same build, it's just a slightly different micro on the Herald of Ice. So Cospri's Malice itself is a sword that just triggers whatever skills you have inside of it, only cold-based skills based off of your melee crits. So in this build we have Blade Flurry. Every time Blade Flurry crits, then you will unleash your spells, and in this case I have 1 Freezing Pulse and 1 Glacial Cascade in either Cospri's for the dual wield, and then also a cast on crit Glacial Cascade or Freeze Pulse in the chest. So it's similar these days in what a lot of people will have played with, and that is Poet's Pen. Simply, though, the difference is that Poet's Pen doesn't require any crits or anything. It's just every time you attack, you will unleash whatever is socketed in the Poet's Pens. So they are a bit more versatile and probably smoother these days, but Cospri's Malice lets you have some Whirling Blades, so a nice movement skill, and some Fortify action attached to that movement skill. As well as that, it is built just a little bit differently, and the damage is somewhat similar in the end, I would think, when comparing it to Poet's Pen. Just Poet's Pen is a bit simpler to build around and a bit more versatile. However, I do think Cospri's Malice is still something you can play around with in this game, considering when I first picked them up they were only a couple of chaos as well. They are a much more cheaper option than the Poet's Pens too. But it does potentially pose a bit of a problem in the endgame single target, where you can see I'm taking on some of these Elder Guardians, and then Elder himself, and likewise going into the tier 16s and Shaper and Uber Elder. The fact is, you do need to keep up a decent amount of attack speed, a decent amount of accuracy, crit, and then also actually crit the enemy, whereas Poet's Pen doesn't really hit anything. You just shoot stuff and Poet's Pen will trigger. However, I am trying my best to maintain a balance between all of those stats and get some decent level of proc rate going. So it takes a bit of time to ramp up our frenzies and our power charges, but once we do, the damage is pretty respectable, and it is on autopilot with power charge on crit and the Raider Ascendancy. So the charges keep themselves up. Once those are up, once we have our flasks up, the single target should get pretty respectable, especially if you factor in our newfound love of the Val RF, just a flat 30% extra damage whenever you pop it. And overall, I think the single target should hold up fairly well for the end game. It is still a bit too early to tell, have only taken on a few little elders here or there, and starting to work into the tier 12 to 13 map types. So I will hopefully have another video about this in the next few days, but you can see another perk here taking on Atziri Mirror. That's because the Elementalist Ascendancy makes you immune to Elemental Reflect. So hopefully in the next few days we'll have a bit more update about the end game, but for now I want to show you how I built the character and what I've done to get this far. So the character currently, as I mentioned, is level 88. It's called Ethical Blade Flurry Use, and it is a Scion. The name basically just because Blade Flurry is pretty overpowered right now, and I'm just using it as a trigger for cast on crit with the new micro that's a bit demonic and funky looking, but it's not that easy to see through our collection of garbage that we attack with. You can see I do have a Herald of Ice, a Purity of Ice, and an Arctic Armor as my reservation. There's not really too much I can do there, and I think Purity of Ice should just help fill out resists, as well as help me take on Uber Elder in the end, but the character itself is being built around, like I mentioned, Cospri's Malice foils. I corrupted both of mine at the temple and just got 3 white sockets, no big deal there. For the most part, you will be using 2 blues, 1 green almost always anyway. But the item, like I said, is basically just going to trigger your cold spells throughout the sockets whenever you crit. So in this one, I have a Glacial Cascade. In this one, I have a Freezing Pulse. And then whenever our Blade Flurry crits, which at the moment should be quite a lot of the time, 41 crit without any power charges or Diamond Flask. Whenever that crits, you will unleash both of these on a 0.25 second cooldown. So similar to Pulse Pen, you can get up to 4 procs per second, and then you have a cast on crit in your chest setup, which can get 2 procs per second on 0.5 second cooldown, and to that I attach a Freezing Pulse just for clear, but when we get into business single target, gonna chuck in another Cascade, so in the end I have 2 Cascades, 1 Freezing Pulse, and they should go off quite frequently and do some serious damage. I have Hypothermia attached to both of these, and then the Cascade has a Conk effect in the Cospris, and this one maps with Ice Bite, but I sub in Controlled Destruction and probably even Ellie Focus for the Freeze Pulse when we get real. Whereas the chest setup has a Power Charge on crit, a Glacial Cascade, a Crit Strikes, Hypothermia, Cast on crit, and the Blade Flurry itself. So plenty of stuff that's trying to boost both the crit of the Blade Flurry and the Cascade or the Freezing Pulse, and then a few little utility and damage things like Hypothermia. Now, compared to my last version of this build, there are a few differences. As I mentioned, to start with, Elementalist has been reworked, so you become Reflect immune, you have a bit of extra damage in the form of Shock, giving 10% damage taken, and then 10 pen as well. So it's about 20% damage just from that one node, and Reflect immunity, which is pretty good, I think. And then I wanted the sustain from the Raider, so we got a bit of movement speed, bit of dodge, and then Onslaught while on full frenzies, which is nice for your movement and attack speed, as well as that, the frenzies when you hit a rare or unique enemy. So I did build into 5 frenzy charges, and that gives me quite a lot of extra damage, as well as a lot of extra attack speed, and as well as that, the permanent Onslaught. So just because Assassin's pretty weak this time around, I think it's better off to get Raider. You can even pick a few other things like probably Slayer, maybe even Champion, maybe Juggernaut, plenty of versatility there. Inquisitor's pretty good as well. So Scion, I think, is not a bad choice right now because of the flexibility you can go with, but I went Elementalist and Raider. And that also meant that I started down here in my passive tree, went around and grabbed a few frenzies, plenty of crit as well all over the tree, so the generic crit is what you're really looking for, that doubles in both the Blade Flurry and the spells. So that's this over here, here as well, and then you get a bit of multi, bit of crit there, and some spell crit, and the power charges. So we do run 4 power charges with our power charge on crit setup. Running it there. And the other main difference in the build is that I'm also running Mark of the Shaper this time around. Gives a bunch of extra spell damage when you have an Elder item in your right slot, and I managed to roll some sort of Warlord's Mark on hit ring. Just spammed a lot of chaos on a lot of rings, probably something like 800 chaos onto 10 of these diamond rings, created like 10 Warlord's Mark rings. None of them really seem to have anything attached to them. This is the best one with 8 all res. Basically just Warlord's Mark on hit, slap a life onto it, and you're good to go. And that just means you don't have to reserve your mana with a Blasphemy Warlord's Mark. But, these aren't super important. You can actually fit the Blasphemy on if you get some other reservation, if you drop the Purity. The biggest problem is all of the gem sockets that we have allocated right now. So currently I have Arcane Surge, Righteous Fire, Frost Bomb, and increased duration attached over here. So when you Frost Bomb underneath an enemy, you Arcane Surge it. When you pop Vile Righteous Fire, you get lots of extra damage. All of those seem pretty crucial, except for maybe the duration, but it is a nice quality of life. In the gloves, we have Arctic Armor, Purity of Ice, Herald of Ice, and Summon Ice Golem. And in the helm, we have faster attacks, Whirling Blades, Flame Dash, and Fortify. I don't really want to lose any of these sockets, so I can't even fit a second golem in. When I can summon 2 golems, I can only actually summon 2 ice golems. Otherwise, you could slap in a blasphemy, you could do some other things like decoy totem, ancestral protector. I just don't have the room, I can't really make up my mind there. And one other thing I managed to do is grab a belt, shape a belt with the ability to roll increased cooldown recovery speed, put a bunch of chaos into these belts, came up with one before and then this one. So good life roll and increased cooldown recovery speed is all you're really looking for. What this does is it means that this 0.25 second cooldown on the trigger of the spell is going to get reduced by 15% or 14% in this case. The belt can roll up to 20%. So the idea is to get up to 20% there, and that takes the cooldown from 0.25 to 0.2. So instead of 4 procs a second, you can get 5 procs a second. You can do the same on Shape of Boots. Tried to roll a pair like that as well. They just became amazing instead of doing anything with cooldown recovery speed, but ideally you try and get some of that factored in too. So the only other thing I want to mention right now is how I leveled the character. Basically, you can go with Freeze Pulse all the way. You can level with Freeze Pulse until Cospri's Malice themselves, and you get the threshold jewels very early on, first snow, and just go through here and then put another one there, and eventually once you get the Ascendancy to get to Path of Ranger, you unspec those nodes and start over here. But you just go up this way, get both of these, and Freezing Pulse will carry you all the way. I, however, at level 38 started Cast on Critting, just because I could. It's not super easy. You do need a Vacant Dagger. You do need crit just about everywhere you can get it. With a Tabula Rasa, Cast on Critting through your Blade Flurry, Freeze Pulse, Cascade, that sort of thing. I don't think it's super easy to do, but I did manage to do it with all that Twink gear, and I thought it was more fun than just Freeze Pulsing. But I recommend that you can just Freeze Pulse your entire way, all the way through, maybe even some Cascade, play around with it, self-cast. As soon as you get to Cospri's Malice, jeweled foils, the build takes off and becomes pretty amazing to play with. Likewise, you could do Poet's Pen version of the build or just level with Poet's Pens, but that's up to you guys to decide if you want to do something like that. This is merely going to be just another attempt for me of Cospri's Malice character. Hopefully I can take on something like Uber Elder. We'll see how the end game goes in the next few days. Lastly, I'll just mention my micros. This is just a Stygian armor set, the new one, with Celestial Character Effect, Subjugator Cloak. The Cospri's Malice themselves look pretty damn cool, but I do have a Harpy weapon effect attached. Without it, you can see that they have an alt art and they look pretty cool these days, so they could just be a nice skin transfer if you want to think about that yourselves. So thank you very much for watching the video, guys. Hope it was enjoyable, informative, and I'm not too sick for you. But thanks for watching, and see you next time.